You are kneeling in the mud at the edge of a river, you press your fingers into the wet earth and shape it into a wall. A city is about to be born from mud alone. History will later call this place the cradle of civilization. But the real story is far stranger than that gentle nickname suggests. This was not a peaceful beginning. It was a desperate negotiation with a landscape that wanted you dead. Between two rivers, the Tigris and the Euphrates, the land floods without warning and then bakes into cracked clay for months. There is almost no rain. There is almost no stone, no metal ore, barely any timber worth building with. And yet within a few thousand years, this exact stretch of unforgiving ground produced the first cities, the first writing, the first laws, the first empires. Long before any city stood here, small farming villages had already learned to dig short irrigation ditches off the riverbanks, coaxing barley and dates out of soil that received almost no rainfall of its own. Archaeologists call this earliest period the Ubaid, and its people left behind something quietly astonishing. Pottery of nearly identical style spread across hundreds of miles, suggesting trade, travel, and shared ideas long before any single ruler existed to enforce them. A settlement called Eridu, which later Sumerians would name in their own myths as the very first city ever created by the gods, had already existed as a modest farming town for well over 1,000 years before it became a legend. Every spring, the Tigris and Euphrates swelled with snowmelt from mountains hundreds of miles away, and every spring they overflowed unpredictably without the gentler seasonal rhythm of a river like the Nile. The people who settled here had no reliable calendar to predict it by, so they built. They dug canals to catch the flood before it drowned their fields. They raised levees to hold the water back. They organized labor on a scale no hunting band had ever needed, because a single family could not dig a canal system alone. It took dozens of hands, coordinated, obedient, fed on a shared harvest. And once you have coordinated labor at that scale, you need someone keeping track of it. That single problem, of who owes what grain to whom, is where writing was born, and it did not appear all at once. Long before anyone pressed a stylus into clay, Mesopotamian traders and temple officials used small clay tokens, shaped like tiny cones, spheres, and discs, each one standing for a fixed quantity of a specific good, a jar of oil, a measure of grain. The archaeologist Denise Schmandt-Besserat spent years tracing these tokens across excavation sites and argued that they were the true ancestors of writing itself. Tokens were sealed inside hollow clay envelopes as a receipt, and to remember what was sealed inside without breaking it open, officials began pressing the tokens into the envelope's wet outer surface before sealing it. Eventually, someone realized the impression alone was enough. You did not need the token at all if the mark could stand for it. Around 3200 BCE, in the city of Uruk, that realization exploded into something new. Administrators began pressing reed styluses into wet clay tablets, recording transactions far more complex than any token system could hold alone. Not poetry, not prayers, tallies, sacks of barley, jars of oil, days of labor owed to the temple.
The archaeologist Guillermo Algaze has argued that Uruk's explosive growth during this period was driven by a trade network reaching hundreds of miles outward, pulling in timber, metal, and stone that the city itself could never produce on its own floodplain, and pushing outward its administrative technology in return, planting small Uruk-style trading colonies as far away as modern-day Syria and Iran. Writing did not begin as art, it began as a leash on human memory, because memory alone could no longer hold an economy this large. Within a few centuries, cuneiform script had evolved from simple counting marks into something that could record law, myth, and history. The wedge-shaped strokes, pressed rather than drawn, gave the script its name from the Latin word for wedge, though the people writing it had no idea a future language would ever describe it that way. The Sumerians, who built these first cities, believed the world itself had been organized by their gods the same way they organized their canals, through hierarchy, assignment, and duty. Every person had a role, every role had an owner. This was not a democracy of farmers. It was a stack of obligations, temple above household, king above temple official, and at the very bottom, a laborer whose entire life could be summarized in a clay tablet listing his rations. And still, for all its rigidity, this system worked. It worked almost too well. Cities like Uruk, Ur, Lagash, and Kish grew wealthy enough to fight each other over water rights and land boundaries, recorded in some of the earliest known border disputes in history, arguments between city-states over canal lines carved directly into inscribed boundary stones. Kings in this era ruled as as something between a chief priest and a war leader, and later generations looked back on this age with such awe that they compiled a document historians now call the Sumerian King List, a chronicle blending real rulers with mythic reigns lasting tens of thousands of years, as if the scribes themselves could not quite believe how far back their own history stretched. The researcher Samuel Noah Kramer spent much of his career translating these early Sumerian texts, revealing not just administrative tallies but genuine literature, hymns, proverbs, and the earliest surviving fragments of what would become the Epic of Gilgamesh, a story of a half-divine king confronting the plain, unavoidable fact of his own mortality. Around 2334 BCE, a man named Sargon, who according to later legend had been set adrift on a river as an infant, only to be raised by a gardener, rose from a low administrative position to conquer city after city and stitch them into something the region had never seen before. A true empire stretching from the Persian Gulf toward the Mediterranean coast. The Akkadian Empire, as it came to be called, was the first time in recorded history that a single ruler claimed direct authority over multiple previously independent cities at once, appointing his own daughter, Enheduanna, as high priestess in the city of Ur. Enheduanna is now recognized as the first author in world history whose name we actually know, composing hymns to the goddess Inanna that blended personal devotion with unmistakable political messaging, reinforcing her father's authority through sacred language rather than the sword. But an empire built on rivers still answers to weather, and the weather turned. Around 2200 BCE, the Akkadian Empire collapsed with startling speed, and for decades historians debated why. Rebellion, certainly. Overextension, certainly, as the empire's frontier regions grew harder and harder to hold from a single center. But the archaeologist Harvey Weiss, studying soil cores from northern Mesopotamia, found something else layered into the ground itself, a sharp, sudden increase in wind-blown dust consistent with an abrupt multi-century drought, a climate event now referred to as the 4.2 kiloyear event. Entire farming regions that had fed the empire's northern cities appear to have been abandoned within a generation, their populations pushed south toward the very heartland cities that could no longer absorb them. An empire that runs on grain surplus cannot survive when the grain stops arriving. Sargon's dynasty did not fall to a single battle. It starved slowly from the edges inward. Ask yourself what happens to a system built entirely on hierarchy when the thing at the bottom of that hierarchy, the harvest, simply disappears.
But this wasn't the end of Mesopotamia. In the next part, we'll uncover how this civilization fell even further, what truly drove its decline, the rise of new kingdoms, the wars that reshaped the region, and the rulers who fought to control it, and we'll uncover what happened to the people, cities, and ideas that once made Mesopotamia one of the greatest civilizations in human history.